Good morning and welcome back to Whether or Not and to What Degree. I'm meteorologist Kylee Miller along with meteorologist Nicole Papay. We have a really interesting topic to dive into today. It's all about urban heat islands.
Yeah, urban heat islands impact areas with more concrete structures. Think of cities with their urban centers, that the things that the heat gets attracted to, gets absorbed into, and then it actually makes the air surrounding those structures hotter than some of the less urban areas nearby. So it's kind of cool to see it on a weather map. We see it all the time. Downtown Greenville could be, 95 degrees. Spartanburg just nearby, Lawrence just nearby, several, if not almost 5 to 10 degrees cooler.
Right, so there's a real difference about the rural areas, the urban areas, and think about it when we talk about how hot it is outside. We're in the dog days of summer now. We say wear that light and loose fitted colored clothing. You want the white color, the lighter colors, because it won't absorb all of the heat. It will give us some relief, where if you wear the darker colors, that tends to absorb and just attract the heat, and it just traps it.
It does, and that can go for city buildings as well. So we want to bring in an expert today. We have Dr. Jeremy Hoffman here with us. He is the David and Jane Cohn Scientist at the Science Museum of Virginia. Thank you, Dr. Hoffman, for joining us today.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we want to talk to you a lot about urban heat islands. You were noted on a climate website that we had looked at, Kylie and I, just delving into this topic a little bit more. So we want to kind of start with the things that can come, the dangers that can come for cities, people that live in cities with these urban heat islands.
Sure. So, first and foremost, urban heat islands are harmful to our health. They basically turn up the thermostat on already uncomfortable and sometimes dangerous heat waves. And we know from research that in some neighborhoods, particularly those without extensive amounts of trees, without access to parks, or neighborhoods without buildings tall enough to create shade, this can really mean dangerous conditions for people, especially those elderly individuals and anyone with an underlying health condition like asthma and COPD. And what's really interesting is there are some studies that are coming out now showing that there's even higher rates of preterm birth occurring in these more built out areas of cities. And we also know from our own research that these effects are disproportionately borne out by communities that tend to be located in these hotter areas, which consistently are communities of color and those without means, like lower income and higher poverty neighborhoods. So that's really just one aspect of it. It impacts on our health, but there are many others that we can talk about too.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. It poses a threat to health, and when it gets so hot, we have to really crank up our ACs. That's not the best for the environment.
Yeah, as that's a really good point. As we, these particular areas of cities need to use more energy to cool themselves down, if they even have, air conditioning to begin with. That is a feedback loop, in that as we use more energy, then we're actually putting more, carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, especially if we're not using a clean source of energy. And that continues to warm the background climate and can even further emit more heat back into the urban area itself. So it's really sometimes a catch-22 about, what should we do in order to achieve more, adaptive capacity or the ability to thrive in these hotter areas of cities.
Let's talk about these shade canopies and the benefits that they can have and other things cities can do to increase their ability to cool.
Yeah, so it might be surprising, but we see in our own research that actually using higher height buildings in particular areas along, say, east-western corridor streets can actually cast shadows on pedestrian areas and places where people might be using public transportation. So one of the things we can do almost overnight is increase shade at those sorts of places where people might be congregating for waiting for the bus or for the train. And, ultimately, this is a case of our cities are wearing dark T-shirts instead of light ones. So if we can just increase the amount of reflectivity through using more white and reflective surfaces, as well as inviting nature back into the city, that can actually work fundamentally to lower a city's temperature versus, the comparison to the outside rural areas.
Yeah, and it's so important to think about going forward. We are going to keep building. There's not going to be a stop in building. Have you personally been seeing any builders using different materials or adding that green space just to try to protect these urban heat islands a little bit better?
Sorry, can you say that question again?
Oh, yeah, sure thing. So with these urban heat islands, have you personally been seeing any builders using different materials to try to minimize this?
Sure. I've been really fortunate to see a bunch of projects both here in Richmond, Virginia, and across the country. People are tending to, immediately go to rooftops. As we replace aging rooftops, we can just simply go from the darker color to a lighter color. And that not only reflects the sun's energy, it actually lowers the air temperature inside of the home. So that it does kind of a double whammy. It lowers the city's temperature while saving the people that live there more money on their cooling expenses. So those are the sorts of things that we can be doing across the board, even in rural areas, to lower our energy consumption while keeping indoor temperatures lower. Now, also, I have been seeing places that have been making these park minimums. So in urban planning, you tend to hear of parking minimums. I've been seeing park minimums. You have to have a certain amount of green space that people can use and stay shaded in the summer as one of the main ways that people have been expanding that kind of greenness of their cities instead of just continuing to expand out in gray.
Let's talk about the things you would want to tell people going forward.
Sure. I think the biggest thing is that our research has shown that two families waking up in the same city have a fundamentally different experience of a heat wave in our cities across the country. So some families wake up in an air-conditioned home, to an air-conditioned car, to go and drop off the kids at an air-conditioned school, to go to an air-conditioned office. And so they're never really exposed or experience that extreme heat, especially those that are made worse by the urban heat island effect. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, there's a family that wakes up in a non-air conditioned, a low energy efficient home. They maybe walk through a treeless neighborhood to get to a tree bus stop, to take their kids to a school without resources and potentially going to a manual labor job. And when we talk about the effects of these urban heat islands, it's important to remember we're talking about these neighbors, our neighbors that are experiencing a much worse heat wave than those of us that might have the ability to adapt under these extreme conditions. So I think that that's the biggest thing that I want people to take away, is that these urban heat islands consistently and persistently affect those of us in our cities that don't have the ability necessarily to buy that fan, buy that air conditioning, and adapt to these conditions. So it's really an opportunity for us to the rising tide lifts all boats. By improving the thermal quality of our cities, we actually improve a lot of other things all at once. So that's what's really hopeful and really great about using this kind of science to improve our cities into the future.
We really hope that city planners here, because this city is expanding so fast, can listen to this and hear a lot more about it and take a lot of that into consideration.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. Hope to come back someday.
Absolutely. We'll keep you on our list for sure. Thank you all for joining us today for this episode of Whether or Not and To What Degree. We are from Fox, Carolina, and we'll see you next time.